When you picture the American presidency today, you probably imagine an impenetrable bubble, a highly trained Secret Service detail, armored motorcades, and immediate access to the greatest medical care on the planet. But historically, holding the highest office in the land meant stepping into a physical danger zone. The men who held the highest power on Earth were rarely taken out in dramatic cinematic standoffs. They were routinely brought down by incredibly mundane, entirely preventable threats. We tend to buy into a specific warrior mythology. We assume the greatest hazard to a president is an assassin's bullet, but the historical record tells a different story. Extreme physical toughness and elite protection details couldn't cheat death, because the true killers of presidents were almost never the men holding the guns. Take Andrew Jackson. When a shooter tried to end his life, Jackson survived the first ever presidential assassination attempt by violently beating his attacker with a cane. Yet that violent survival didn't grant him immortality. Jackson actually met his end quietly in bed, suffering from a condition called dropsy, where the body fills with excess water. In his final moments, the tough guy persona melted away, and he went out pleading with his children not to cry. Then there's Teddy Roosevelt. During a 1912 campaign stop, he was shot point blank in the chest. Instead of seeking immediate medical attention, Roosevelt stood right back up and delivered an 84-minute speech with the bullet still lodged inside him. But even a man who could shrug off a gunshot wound eventually succumbs to his own biology. Years later, permanently weakened by malaria and a leg infection he caught during an Amazonian jungle expedition, Roosevelt died quietly in his sleep from a simple blood clot. Surviving bullets certainly built their larger-than-life myths, but their quiet, strictly medical deaths emphasize a stark reality. No amount of personal grit grants true invincibility. In fact, possessing extreme power often meant you received the worst possible treatment. Having access to the elite doctors of the era was frequently a death sentence. George Washington developed a highly curable throat infection, likely epiglottitis. Today, a standard round of antibiotics clears that up, but his physicians opted for bloodletting, draining an astonishing 80 ounces of blood from his body, the equivalent of 6 cans of soda, which effectively sealed his fate. James A. Garfield faced an even darker medical irony. After being shot in the back at a train station, he survived the initial wound because the bullet missed his vital organs. His greatest threat was actually the medical team that arrived to save him. Doctors repeatedly probed his open wound with unsterilized fingers, desperately searching for the bullet. They even punctured his liver in the process. This reckless malpractice caused a massive, agonizing infection that slowly killed Garfield over the next 80 days. Because these men were the commander-in-chief, they were subjected to overzealous, unchecked medical interventions that practically guaranteed their demise. When they weren't being killed by their own doctors, presidents fell victim to the completely mundane environment of the capital city itself. For over a century, the history books claimed William Henry Harrison died because he foolishly refused to wear a coat while giving a grueling 2-hour inaugural speech in the freezing rain. But recent analysis points to a much more unsanitary culprit. Harrison didn't get sick until weeks after the inauguration. It's now highly likely he contracted typhoid fever or septic shock from contaminated drinking water right at the White House. A decade later, Zachary Taylor faced a similarly bizarre environmental threat following a 4th of July celebration in the sweltering heat of Washington, D.C. Desperate to cool off, Taylor retreated indoors and consumed bowls of raw cherries washed down with pitchers of iced milk. Without any modern food safety standards in place, the snack triggered a fatal bout of gastroenteritis. Security details can throw themselves in front of a physical threat, but they are entirely useless against microscopic killers lurking in everyday food and water. Sometimes, however, the end of a presidency shifts from the bizarre to the strangely poetic, especially when looking at the complex relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. These two founders went from revolutionary allies to bitter political rivals, and finally back to lifelong pen pals. And then they experienced a staggering historical coincidence. Both men died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day after signing the Declaration of Independence. Suffering from severe illness, Jefferson made a deliberate effort to hold on to life just long enough to reach the holiday. In his final hours, he repeatedly asked his doctor, "Is it the 4th?" before finally letting go. Hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts, a 90-year-old John Adams lay on his own deathbed. His deeply ironic final words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives," completely unaware that his oldest friend had passed away just hours earlier. This synchronicity frames their final moments around profound human connection and historical destiny, rather than executive power. From surviving violent assassins only to succumb to quiet illnesses, to being killed by the very doctors trying to save them, or quite literally being defeated by bad fruit, the ways these leaders met their end are wildly unpredictable. These unglamorous deaths strip away the historical mythology. They remind us that the marble statues and grand portraits obscure the fragile reality of the men depicted in them. Beneath the prestigious titles, the massive security details, and the immense authority over the free world, these individuals were bound by the exact same physical fragilities as anyone else. No amount of executive power can conquer human mortality. Which of these unexpected presidential deaths surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below.